Hello, I am Modita, and welcome back to Satisfactory. If you are new here, welcome. I was looking for a challenge for a new playthrough, and I decided to load balance just about everything. There are 0 factories with manifolds in this world. This is episode 33 of the load balance playthrough, and today I'm going to finish my 200 gigawatt nuclear power plant. In the first episode of this journey, I laid out the start of the foundations and mapped out where everything was going with patterns. I can't wait for those to be free in 1.0. I then ran out of steel beams and decided to build the towers that would be close and bring in more steel beams and concrete. The entire second episode is how I load balanced everything coming off of the trains. Now, I need to place a bulk of the machines and belt it all up. How hard can that be? Instead of breaking this up into even more episodes, this is just a long one. Enjoy. And we're back in our northwest corner of the map. So the trains are running now. I know I kind of forgot to show that at the end of the last video, but I went around and turned on all the trains and then just kind of let them run for a little bit to see how the throughput was. So as you can see, I've got some temporary sinks set up just to test all of the throughput, get everything running smooth. So the only one I haven't turned on, unfortunately, is Uranium. And I say unfortunately because I'm a little bit farther ahead in my playthrough than this recording. And yeah, that Uranium train, that's gonna cause me some headache. But we'll get to that later. Everything else running fantastic. Nice and smooth. Our throughput is looking good so far. Everything's running. So eventually what I'm going to do, and this was unfortunately a little short-sighted, I just wanted to get everything tested before I added too much to the factory and realized that I needed to completely redo something because it just didn't work. So I added all these sinks, but then what I realized later is this was going to be a huge pain to go through and manually delete all of these sinks and plug up the correct lines. Usually I only have 2 or maybe 3 sinks to do, but I think there's 10 in here, and I really didn't want to have to run around and do that. When it comes time to turn on the factory, what I'm going to do is actually add just a smart splitter right about here in front of the sink. So then what I can do is put all of the sinks on one priority power switch. When I turn it off, all of the resources will be forced into the overflow and will be sent into the factory. But this episode is going to be all about placing the machines. So let's get to it. So thankfully I had the idea of starting at the end and working my way this way, because if I run out of space, I can push these things this way, whereas if I build starting there and going this way, I run into the edge of the world. So we're going to start with the nuclear power plants, and these are quite big boys. So that's definitely why I wanted to start with these and work my way back, just in case I run out of space. I came up with this real simple blueprint, and it's only a quarter of it, and I'm going to show you how it kind of all works together. So the original plan was I was going to start right in this corner, and the way this works is I just snap 4 of these together. And I've got a nice little raised platform. The nuclear power plant is going to go right here on top. So unfortunately I have to delete all of these blueprints because they'll interfere and prevent me from placing a water extractor. And unfortunately, this is the first thing that I ran into. And really unfortunately, I placed a whole bunch of these platforms originally, and then found out that I actually can't place a water extractor right here, which is really strange because I had sworn I tested it, but I don't think I tested it quite here in the very corner of the map. And we still can't. So if we go just a little bit farther, all of a sudden now we can. So there's this weird imaginary line that prevents me from placing a water extractor any farther, but I can still place it here. So evidently when I tested it, I was just far enough away from the edge of the map that I thought this would be totally fine. I just didn't test it all over the place where I was planning on putting them. Silly me, that was definitely my fault. So thankfully, I can place them here. So I'm going to have to move basically this whole square over, which is fine because I haven't blocked out the spots for the recycling yet, which works out great. So less patterns I have to remove and replace. So we're going to end up starting, the very first one is going to be right here and then go over. But let me show you how this whole thing is going to come together. So once I have my platform set, I'm going to make sure that all 4 are deleted, and then I'm just going to have to manually replace them. I could come up with some smaller blueprints to snap them down real quick, but this is really pretty easy. And the other thing, I know I've probably showed it off before, but I really like to do is just lay foundations underneath. Because now, instead of the water extractor being completely freeform, I can now snap it to the same grid in the 1 meter increments like all the rest of the machines. Just makes lining up the pipes and everything a little bit easier. So because the box for a blueprint includes the whole cube, that means the blueprint extends all the way down here even though this is open space. So I actually have to delete these 2. And now with that, I can place my water extractors. So I already know the exact placement. So the center of the floaty bit here needs to line up with the center of this foundation. And by doing that, the very center of this whole thing will be right on the edge. So that way I can place 2 of them and they're going to be exactly in the same spot, kind of on either side of this middle. To finish this off, I'm going to just use a half foundation to give myself a little bit more space to work with. So I'm going to place that there, and then I'm just going to fill in this gap in the back just so it looks a little bit more even. And now I can place these blueprints back. Alright, had to grab some materials real quick, but now that we have all of that, I can show you how this all comes together. So then on top of the platform, I'm going to place my reactor, or I guess power plant. So I want this to be right in the middle in between these 2 little things right here, and then I want the very front to be lined up so the pipe is right in the middle and the input and output are on either side. So that's right where I want it. Perfect. Okay, so next up is water extractors have to be blue, obviously. And we gotta make this green. Then we're gonna go ahead and go with some pipes. I'm gonna set a junction cross right there in the middle. And then I'm gonna use a Mark II pipe. So even though each one of these could be technically a Mark I pipe, I prefer to make the whole thing Mark II if you need Mark II at some point. So the way this is gonna work, and I don't have my power shards on me, but these are all going to be overclocked to 200%. So the reason I'm doing 200% instead of 250% is the numbers just work out fantastic this way. So because in the last step, making the uranium fuel rods, I'm going to be using 40 manufacturers, having 40 nuclear power plants just makes this a whole lot simpler. Because then it's a 1-to-1, even though that's not how I'm going to belt it up. I would have loved to do that. I just couldn't figure out a good way to do it because these things take up just so much space. I really like to only overclock these to 200%, and the reason for it is that means that the water consumption will only be 480 instead of 600. Since, as of right now, there's still issues with transporting the full 600 at times, I think it's best to have any requirement be just under that, and then you pretty much never have issues. So this only requiring 480 instead of the 600 is totally worth building the extra 8 or whatever power plants, and it'll make all the load balancing much easier. So each of these are also going to be overclocked to 200% so that each one outputs 240, giving me a total of the 480. But because this is, as we can see, right past, or right at the limit, really, of a Mark I pump. So if you didn't know, it'll tell you right here, Mark I pumps will do 20 meters. The Mark II will do 50. But the truth is, you actually get 10% more, even though it'll come up with a little warning sign saying that it's exceeding the max head lift. you do have 10%. So these actually lift 22 meters and these lift 55. At this distance, it's just about at the limit of a Mark 1 pump, but since we're dealing with a gigantic power plant, never really want this to have any issues, so I'm just going to use Mark 2. So I'm just going to place a Mark 2 pump right here in the center of this foundation, plug that into there, and on horizontal to vertical, it'll work one way. So this way it wants to go that way, but if I connect from the machine down, then I get the perfect angle that I want. So this was my solution instead of having just kilometers and kilometers of pipes. Because I've done this before and had just a whole setup of just water extractors, and then you just bring over just a wall of pipes. And I wanted to try to figure out a way of not doing that. And so this is what I came up with. It does cost you one pump for every setup, but at the cost of 8 megawatts for each one, I think this is totally worth it. And because I feel like some of the biggest pain points in this game are pipes and water issues, if I can keep these pipes just really short, about as short as you can make them, then hopefully I'll be able to avoid some of the headaches. So that's one down. Just need to reposition this whole thing and place 39 more. So the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to have 5 rows of 8. And then that way, when I do the load balancing from the manufacturers, I can just do a 5-way split and then send 1/5 down each row. And then that will load balance into the 8. But because I have a whole bunch more recipes and machines to place, let's go ahead and move on. Moving on to the next step, working backwards, we're going to do the uranium fuel rods. I need 40 manufacturers to make these. Let me show you how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to leave myself just shy of 2 foundations in the back. That way the splitters line up right on the edge of this foundation. So I'm going to do these in groups of 5 essentially. So this is kind of the pattern that it's going to follow all the way across. So I want the one with the mergers, and then I kind of want the one that's going to group up with that one. So they're sloping up this way. And then I'm going to do a set of 3. So these 3 group together. And let me show you how all of these come together for a nice 5-way split. So I want to take my 4 splitters stacked, even though this recipe only needs 3 things. I'll just go through and delete that very top level one. That one is definitely not quite far enough. That needs to be there. There we go. Now they're all even. So this right here, we'll split it in half. So let me connect some belts real quick. So these are all going to connect together to make a 3-way split. Don't know why I connected that top belt. And then these 2 are going to be connected. And then this is going to connect both of those splitters. And to bring it all together, we just need to get some mergers right here in the beginning. So I only need 3. So that's a 3-way split. This is the 2, but I need to use the 3rd output on all of these. So the way I'm going to connect these is I'm just going to place this in line with the splitter. So I just need the bottom 3. So this is going to come out to here. Connect to that one. So it'll come around to here. And into there. And so that's the part that loops back into the merger. And then the merger just goes into the splitter. Delete that top one. So that is how we do a 5-way split for the manufacturers. And I'm basically just going to do this 8 more times. So it'll be 4 of these sets on this side, and then I'm just going to mirror it on this side so that it'll all come together at a single point and then split off from there. Moving on to the next step, we've got the infused uranium cell. And the thing is, this is another 40 manufacturers that is going to get load balanced the exact same way. So I'll make sure to show off the actual split once everything's placed together, but I'm going to try to breeze through some of this. Alright, so moving on to the Quickwire. So I'm using the fused Quickwire recipe. So this is going to use a total of 70 machines. Unfortunately, because of all of the numbers and the amounts that we're dealing with, I was able to place them in groups of 20, and that's what's going to go in each one of these towers. So we'll have 20, 40, 60, and then this is only a half, so this is just going to have the last 10. And thankfully I was able to keep the clock speed at 100% this way, which is super helpful for all of the load balancing later on. So pretty simple. If each one of these towers is going to house 20, we're just going to put 5 assemblers on each floor. Just going to take my 5 assembler blueprint, line it up in the middle. So I want it to be right in the middle. I need more of the load balancing on this end, so the machines are going to be skewed a little bit towards this way. But it's really easy to line up because I know I want this to be dead center. So if we place A, and then we can go ahead and place B. And this is easy to line up as well because now I just want to make sure that the very center of this assembler is lined up in the very center with the splitters. So we can go ahead and place that, and let's copy that on all 4 floors. With those placed, let me just finish connecting the blueprint. So just need to connect the 2 halves with those bolts right there. So the 3 main towers are each going to have 750 copper ingots plugged in and 150 Caterium ingots. So I like to do the faster speed on the bottom, the slower speed on top, just for the way that it looks. So this bottom one is going to have 750 plugged in. So that means this next one is going to be 375. So I need Mark 4. And then splitting that in half again is going to be 187.5. So this one's going to need to be a Mark 3. So since we are splitting that in half, I need a Mark 4 belt for here. Do bottom one on this side. And that's going to go all the way up to this one right here. And then since this one is also splitting in half, this one's a Mark 3. Plug that into the bottom one. And that one plugs into this floor. And I just remembered I don't actually need those splitters. That's just right there. And then Mark 3 into there. And then this floor, we've got Mark 3 into here. So I could have squished things together more to get it to fit, but since I really don't like when the floor hole kind of sticks out like that, what I'm going to do to get these up to the very top is we're just going to place one here and one here. So since we're doing the copper here on the left, this is Mark 3. So just plug that up right now. And then we take our Mark 3, come down to the bottom, and plug that up. So now for the Caterium, we're going to do the same sort of thing, but on this side. So Caterium's only 150 coming in initially, so cutting that in half is going to be Mark 2. So let's go ahead and just get this lift out of the way. So let's go ahead and just bring this lift all the way to the top. So Mark 2 into that one. And then from there we can change this. So that's going to be 75, and that means these can all be Mark 1. So we can go ahead and grab Mark 1 here. That goes up to this splitter. One into there. And we can do Mark 1 into this one. Bring this lift down. And there we go. Oh. And there we go. So there's 20 assemblers load balanced in this tower, and then we just need to copy that 3 times and then just do half as much for that one. So that's nice and easy. Moving on to the next towers. I really need to color these. I forgot about that. But we're going to do the copper sheets in these ones. So instead of making these super tall, since these were even more in the center, I wanted to make these nice and short. So that's why they're quite a bit bigger. So these worked out a little bit different as far as the numbers go. So even though I need 52 constructors minimum, I'm actually placing 54 and underclocking them ever so slightly. Because 54 is much easier, I can do 3 groups of 18. So basically 9 on each one of these floors, and then they're just all going to be underclocked. Because thankfully for this, all of the copper sheets are going to one recipe. So it didn't matter that they were putting out such a weird number. I wasn't going to have to load balance any of it. This is only outputting 520 copper sheets, so I got to just merge everything together and put it all on one belt. Makes my life nice and easy. So let me show you how one of these towers are done. Super simple. Since I need 9 constructors, I'm going to start with one just in the dead center here. Yep. And then one on either side. So there's 9. And there's 9. So load balancing each floor, real simple. Just gonna put that there to combine all 3. And then one more splitter in front of that to send half of it to the next floor. So in total I need 1,040 copper ingots, and I'm using 3 towers, so each one is getting this really lovely 346 2/3. So each floor is dealing with 173 1/3. So we need to use Mark 3, like that. Put that splitter there, and then Mark 3 into there. So that's got to be Mark 3. Grab the lift, and there we go. So just need to plug in the copper ingots, and we'll spit out 520 once I copy that 2 more times. Onto the encased industrial pipes. This one's super simple. I just need exactly 12 assemblers for this. So we're just gonna line this up pretty much right in the middle. So I have 2 foundations in the front or back. Line this up with the center of that foundation. And then we've got plenty of space. So we're just gonna copy that same spacing. Load balancing this is super simple. Just need 2 splitters here. On the other half of the foundation, 2 more splitters, and then the last 2 right here. And that will give me nice right angles all the way across. Quick and easy, gotta love it. Jumping over to this side, let's do the pure Caterium ingots. So I'm gonna be using 44 refineries. The first 32 are going to be clocked to 100%, and then the last 12 will take care of the remaining 282, with just a little underclocking needed. So I'm going to bring these in by half a foundation just to give myself a little bit of space. And then we basically just slam them down, I think. Let's make sure the spacing's right. Looks good to me. It's always fun to see. Although I think I got carried away and placed too many. Pretty sure I didn't need that last one. And there we go. There's the 44. Perfect. So each machine, at least for the first 32, will intake 24 of both Caterium ore and water. So let's take care of the water first. So I'm going to join 2 blueprints together, so I have a total of 4 machines, with each one of them requiring 24. This needs 96. So I'm just going to take my water extractor, and the way I'm going to space all of these out is we're going to find the edge and then go 2 meters in. And From there, we're going to place one right at the beginning, and then that way we can get a nice straight pipe. And then each one of these are going to get underclocked to 96. I like doing it this way because it requires less junctions, and I feel that the less times you have to split fluids, the better everything flows. So I would rather use more smaller setups instead of grouping together, 600 water and then resplitting it up. I feel like these smaller systems are just a little bit more reliable. So that's how I'll do the water all the way down. As far as the load balancing up here, it's going to be real easy. I'm just going to grab some temporary foundations instead of having to lift everything up. Alright, put those down. Let's do some load balancing. So these last 12 are going to get load balanced together, so let's just take care of that. So we'll do 3 groups of 2. So that one will just go right here. Let's get this all connected up. And there we go. So as far as the underclocking goes, this is generally how I do all of my underclocking if it's going to be kind of a weird number and not just a really even, 50% or something like that. So you can work with either the input or the output. So I'm just going to work with the input. I know 282 is coming in. We're going to use 12 machines. The default rate is 24. Then we're going to multiply that by 100 to get the percentage. And it turns out to be not too horrible of a number. So you probably could have just done the output if you knew it, but I actually only had the input written down, so this was just easier. And for the load balancing for the other 32, this is the other reason why I like doing it, is 32 is just a great number because it's a power of 2. So this is pretty easy, so we just need to group these in sets of 2s all the way down. And then group those in 2s 4 meters behind that. So set those there. And then just keep working our way back. Which means this one should be right about here. So I've got 768 going into here. So I'll need a Mark IV for these. $192 once we split this in half, so just Mark III. And then 96. So Mark II for these ones. And then we just only need Mark I into the last splitters. And there we go. That's the load balancing for all of the pure Caterium. The copper alloy ingot is honestly just super simple. So even though we are making a ton, this is actually going to be producing 3,700 copper ingots right there. And then we can place down another set of 3. And there we go. So each tower will have 12 foundries. And then this tower is actually going to have 12 and then just a single one on the very top. So as you can imagine, super simple. Just 2 splitters here to combine those, 2 splitters here, and then another 2 to split the 2 floors. Using the copper alloy ingot, each machine needs 50 copper ore and 25 iron ore. So that means we'll put the copper on the bottom. So that means a set of 3 would need 150 copper and then 75. So Mark III and then Mark II. That means we're plugging in 300 into each floor. Let's see right there. So floor hole there, floor hole here. And the other one is 150. And there you go. So that's how each tower will get set up. And then there will obviously be some load balancing on the other end to figure out where all the copper ingots are going. So for the next 3 sections, we're using a whole bunch of assemblers. For the AI limiters, I need 24. For the Quickwire Stators, I need 20. And for the electromagnetic control rods, I need 27. So I'm actually just going to skip ahead because they're honestly just either longer versions of this or using a slightly different blueprint. But I don't think you need to see me place all those. Instead, let's see how all of it gets belted together. And voila, just like that, everything is in place. And got everything moved over, so don't have to have that issue with the water extractors. And then I got all of the assemblers set up, so real simple, just using the 3 assembler blueprint for this one, the 5 assembler blueprint for this one, and then again the 3 assembler blueprint for this last one. And just different amounts, and then load balancing them is pretty simple. I also went ahead and got all of the load balancing to connect all of the manufacturers together. So here's all 40. So like I mentioned earlier, they're basically in groups of 5. So these 5 are grouped together, these 5 are grouped together, and then I have 8 groups of 5. So past that point, it's basically just an 8-way split. So these 2 are joined up together, these 2 are joined up, so here's 4, and that makes up half of them. And then there's the other 4, the other 20 machines. And then they're going to come right here together, and I'll probably just have the splitter right here and bring them in right in the middle. So the only difference between this setup and this setup is that these needed all 4 of the inputs, whereas these ones only needed 3. So with these ones, only one of them is actually able to come in on one belt. The other ones, like this one will be sulfur, this one will be uranium. That needs 2 belts because I need 1,000 of each one of these for this part of the factory. And then the Quickwire, I actually need 4 belts worth. So those are going to get plugged in even later. So the way that'll work is 1 belt will come in right here and plug in there. And then for the other half, it will loop around, come down the middle, and then plug in right here. And that's how I'll get the Quickwire plugged in, and then do the same thing on that side. So with all of this placed, I do still need to place all of the machines for the recycling. But that's honestly, in my opinion, not too hard. It's just a few more recipes, a couple different machines. A lot of what's left is connecting all of the inputs to all of these machines, and then a whole bunch of buses putting all of the right parts where they're supposed to go. So I know I could do a montage of placing a whole bunch of belts, but I'm just gonna skip ahead. So let's go ahead and do that, and I'll give you a tour. Okay, so I know this looks the same, but I added some stuff. So in comparison, the recycling bit is quite a bit smaller than what it takes to make all that waste. So I didn't bother showing off placing all of these because it's really pretty simple for all of these recipes, but let me go through them real quick. So first step, sulfuric acid. So pretty easy recipe, just sulfur and water. I need 240, and I'm going to be using 5 machines. So downclock just slightly to 48 for each one. Since it's only 5 machines, it's just a simple 5-way split. Just going to plug the sulfur into there, and we've got our 240 water coming from 1 water extractor. Just to make things simple, just overclock this instead of having to use a junction and use 2 of them. I also need 240 nitric acid, which takes exactly 8 machines. So those are all clocked to 100%. For this, since there's so many machines, I'd rather split the input instead of balancing out over 8 machines. I figured for this it would be easier to do an even 4 machines, intaking 120 on each side. Another pretty simple recipe, it's just the nitrogen gas, the water, and then the iron plates. So the iron plates will plug right into there. The nitrogen gas is the one last step I haven't actually done yet, but thankfully the node is right there. So we're going to place the resource well pressurizer right there, and then just have the pipe run along the water, and we'll bring it over. Pretty simple. So this is where things went a little bit backwards. The way the process is going to work is the waste is actually going to go to these back two rows, and things are going to filter this way. I just figured I would put the most radioactive things, that being the waste, in the very back, and then that way the final product could be a little bit more towards the front, and we'll also just have a sink right here, because right now I don't have a use for those plutonium fuel rods. So let me jump to the back, and then we'll work forward. So the first step in recycling nuclear waste is the non-fissile uranium. So let me know if this is where you find things get complicated, if you've gotten to this part in the game. But once I kind of stared at the numbers for a little while, I didn't think it was too bad. So the way the waste is going to work is, out of all of the waste, I need 3/4 of it to go to this process. 1/4 of it is going to go to this process. Since the next step, we'll use this one that we're making now and some uranium waste. There are obviously other recipes that will change all of this around, but if you're using these two recipes together, the plutonium pellet and just the regular non-fissile uranium recipe, that's how you need to split the waste. 3/4 to this one, 1/4 to the other one. So in total, this is going to use 600 of the uranium waste, 400 silica. This is going to use all of that 240 nitric acid and 240 sulfuric acid. This needs exactly 16 blenders, so thankfully no underclocking needed. So load balancing is also real simple, just in sets of 2s all the way back. And then instead of grouping them in huge groups, I realized that it would be really easy to just group 2 of them, since each of these blenders is going to output 50 a minute. Each of these particle accelerators need 100 a minute, so I might as well just group up 2 of them and then send it straight over into the particle accelerator. So that's how I load balance those 2 steps. And thankfully I only needed exactly 8 particle accelerators for this step, so load balancing just the waste is also super simple. Just put them in sets of 2s all the way back. This is going to output plutonium pellets, and we're going to send that over to this next step, the encased plutonium cells. So we basically just need to encase those plutonium pellets in concrete, and somehow they get like turned bright blue and yellow. So really simple. This needs exactly 24 assemblers. So just using the 3 assembler blueprint, just got those load balanced. And then here we are at the final step of the recycling process, the plutonium fuel rods. So this is going to take those encased plutonium cells that we're just making, and this is going to take all of the steel beams that we're making in that first episode. I only need 24 electromagnetic control rods, and this will take all of the heat sinks. And then from there, just going to send that into a sink. So this needs 16 manufacturers, so I just did 8 on each side. So just load balance them in sets of 2s. Pretty simple. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot this little guy over here. So this right here is wet concrete. This right here is how I'm going to deal with the wastewater. So instead of recycling it back in, what I feel is a more reliable way, if you just want to make sure you have no issues, is you just send it straight into 3 refineries that are all going to be underclocked slightly. So each one of them will take 64. Each one is going to take 1/3 of that water. In total, we have 240 water per minute that we need to get rid of. And this right here will make concrete, and then it'll join up with the fuel rods, and we're just going to sink them. When I just really don't want to have issues with getting rid of wastewater as a byproduct, this is how I like to deal with it. So the next step is taking all the parts that we already have coming in from the train and getting those to the right places, and then taking all of those outputs and plugging those into the right places. And there is some load balancing I want to show off, but instead of making a huge montage out of all that, I'm just going to skip ahead. And then I'll give you a quick tour and highlights of the load balancing I did, and then we'll get to see all of this come to life. And we're back. So remember that uranium train I talked about in the very beginning that I said was going to give me a whole bunch of headaches? Well, I turned it on, and I honestly don't even know how many hours it's been since the last save point. But let me go show you what horrible problems that thing caused me. So I did add the nitrogen gas, so I do need 2 pipes since I need 960 of it, and that won't fit on one, so we got that sent over into the factory. And now there's a whole bunch of pipes and belts. But before we get to that, let me show you some more of the new stuff over here. So a big reason why I like to get the train stuff out of the way early is it lets me test the throughput, make sure it's high enough. And I needed to make some changes. So my little roundabout got a couple additions, and I wish it was a little bit cleaner. This really was more of a band-aid. Thankfully, right when this problem happened, a YouTube video popped up in my recommended that was just perfect. And I'll make sure I put that in the description because it was just hugely helpful in finding the best band-aid to slap on to fix my issue. So without all of this extra bits on here that really should have been more even, but my 1.0 playthrough hopefully will just look nicer. That's what I'm gonna cross my fingers for. This playthrough, I'm still learning a lot. 3,000 hours in the game and still learning. So the change that I made, obviously I have these little pass-throughs. So if any of the trains need to only go to the very next route, they don't need to enter the roundabout and cause any more traffic for any of those trains. They can just kind of skip it and go right where they need to. So thankfully there are a number of trains that do use these pass-throughs. The other thing that really helped was I added more pass signals in between each entrance exit little junctions. So now there is a pass signal here and here and here. And I honestly was not sure. I had thought about doing that before, but I really wasn't sure how well that would work, and I was afraid that if a train was too long that somehow they would jam up. But while I was building all of the pass-throughs, I watched this run for quite a while, and there was never an issue, and I still haven't seen one. So that really did kind of help. You know, some trains could start going a little bit sooner, even though they would block some tracks. It was going to be their turn next anyways, and so it really did speed things up. So with the addition of adding extra pass signals to block up the roundabout in general, having these little pass-throughs, like that one right there, just used it, alleviated a lot of the traffic issues that I was having. Everything was running fine. Throughput was looking great for all the resources until I turned on the uranium train. That one train started to break everything. Because all of a sudden, there were, I think, 2 trains that were just too close on their timing already, and I didn't realize it because they were fine when I first built them a long time ago. But the train that was running around the world getting polymer resin to feed to the rubber plant all of a sudden wasn't making its round trip fast enough, and so I wasn't making enough rubber. So that factory started to have issues. And then the aluminum factory actually wasn't transporting enough ingots out to the desert for the fuse modular frames, and so the aluminum factory was starting to back up, and the smelters were full, and then some of the refineries were full, and so my power grid started to just go crazy after a while. And so I needed to fix all of that, and then this was my solution to speed up the traffic, because this seemed to be the main culprit of where trains were having traffic. And yeah, this is probably not the best intersection for a high traffic area at all. And I learned that from that video that I watched. So a much better solution would be all around just a better designed intersection that's not a roundabout. But that was going to take just a ton of work, and I didn't want to do that. So this was the best band-aid I could slap on here to get everything working. And now the throughput for everything seems to be just fine. It does give me a lot to think about for 1.0 though. Alright, back at the factory, power plant, whatever you want to call it. let's take a look at some of this load balancing and belt work. So there's a lot to it. I got a little bit burnt out of doing belt work, so I decided to do a little bit of decoration. Now that we know the launch date of 1.0, figured it's time to try some things out in these last few weeks, see what we like, and what we'll bring over to 1.0. So I wanted to be able to just kind of connect everything in the factory and make it more traversable if you weren't flying. And then I had the realization that I always forget about the lookout towers, and that you can connect catwalk crossings right to them. So it makes things pretty nice that you can just kind of use these to create a walkway around an outdoor factory. And I definitely think this is something that I would use in 1.0 for any of the factories that I decide to do kind of more flat and open instead of inside of a big building. So they were really easy to connect as long as you get them lined up correctly. The couple things I really don't like about the lookout towers is if we come over to one of my towers here and I place it, let's just say right there, this looks pretty even. This right here is exactly 20 meters, since each wall and foundation is going to be 4 meters tall, and there's 5 of them. So you would think that this must be at exactly 20 meters. But for whatever reason, they don't quite line up. Alright, let me show you over here. A little bit easier. So they just barely, but it doesn't quite line up. Obviously, you can still walk over it. It won't impede you in any way. But for whatever reason, it's not the same height. And I hope that's something that they'll change, because it just seems kind of silly. So for whatever reason, the power tower platform and the lookout tower, they appear to be the exact same height. But for whatever reason, if you wanted to merge that onto foundations that are exactly at 20 meters, it's not quite clean. So I don't know. I wish that it was just a little bit more uniform. I don't really see a reason why these shouldn't be at exactly 20 meters. Hopefully that's just one of the little tiny details that gets changed at some point. I can keep my fingers crossed. So I just used the lookout towers to connect a whole bunch of catwalk crossings so that if you aren't flying, you can still get a good look of everything. And I think that it makes the factory feel a lot more complete. And it still gives you a way to access everything because there's ladders on each one of these. So you can get down to the ground level and still easily get right back up. So these pretty much connect everything, although I think I might connecting them to the foundation isn't too bad. I still need to add the catwalks probably. I don't know why I forgot those for so long. If you ever do want to merge them up with a foundation, this is the best way that I could come up with. So I get it close, I grab a foundation, I hit H for nudge, I get it to the edge right there, and then what I want to find is as close as we can get. So right here, there's still a gap, so if I hold control so I only nudge half a meter, it's just barely clipping into the foundation. So if I place that there, let's delete this catwalk crossing, and then from here snap one on the edge of the foundation. We can get rid of it, and then we can snap 2 more, and then it'll just barely clip in. I found like that's probably the cleanest I could come up with without using a mod for much finer nudging. But if you have a method to get it a little bit closer or more even, or how to get rid of this weird gap, please let me know. So as far as the just crazy amount of belts, it's not too bad, and they are all color coordinated, although it's kind of hard to see from a distance. But we've got all of them coming out from the train, and if we take a peek inside, we've got everything running. So even the uranium is being sunk right now. We've got all of the rest of them going. And I have them all connected to smart splitters, like I said, which are all connected to a priority power switch. So that's turned on. Once I flip that off, then the resource won't be able to go into the sink, and it'll go into the overflow, which will send it on into the factory. So with a flip of a switch, we'll get to send all of this at once into the factory. So as far as load balancing in here goes, we have a couple. Some of them are really simple. Both of these have 500 silica coming in, but I needed them to be split between 400 for one process, 600 for another. So I just needed to split off 100, send it this way, and then we've got 400 left on this one. So it's just doing a 5-way split. So we've got our merger, splitter splits it in half. One of them has one output being cycled back. The other one remains completely the same because that's the 3/5. So that has 300 on here. We connect it with this one, which has 100, and then 100 is being sent there. And most of the load balancing is like that, except for things like this, where I used just a 2 to 3 belt load balancer. So it just goes into a splitter. You use all 3 outputs. Each output needs to go to a different merger for each of these different ones, and then you've got it balanced this way. So nice and easy. I did need to split off 25. The most complicated of the load balancing was over here for the Caterium. So each one of these had 210 incoming, but I needed to split it with 282, and the rest of it would be that 768 that I need. So the bulk of it got grouped together. Then I came up with this madness to create 282. So I already had the 210, so I just needed 72. So to get the 282, I probably picked the most complicated way to do this, but I took 210 and then I split it in thirds, which would give me 70 on each line. So with 70, I'm up to 280, so I just need 2, and that's what this is. There are definitely better ways to do this, but this basically just shrunk that down into 2 and combined it right here, and then I've got my 282. But hey, it works. So all the resources come out of here, and then we start branching things off. So the Caterium goes to here. We've got the iron and the copper feeding over to here, and that's basically how I picked which one was going where, and I did all of the load balancing and getting things figured out on the inside to keep it all hidden. So I knew that I needed Caterium first, and then the next process, iron and copper, and then kind of moved on down from there so that things would line up hopefully as clean as possible. So for a lot of it, I can keep the belts right on the ground, but obviously there's going to be parts where I need to cross over because I didn't quite think far enough ahead of where I should lay these things out. So I think in hindsight, I probably should have put the Caterium and the ore on this side and then put those over here. But no matter which way I oriented these, some of these parts were just going to have to go to multiple places, and so you're going to cross over. So might as well try to make it look interesting. So this is taking all of the copper ingots on a whole bunch of belts over to the copper sheets and then the fused quickwire. And then this belt highway over here is a whole bunch of the quickwire that's needed for both the AI limiters and the quickwire stators. But a whole bunch of it actually stays and comes to this process right here. So like I mentioned, there's one line that's plugging in right here and plugging up to this quarter. And then the line on the other side plugs into that splitter and feeds this quarter. All of the other products plug in right at the midpoint. And then using lifts make this really pretty easy to make sure that there's no clipping and everything's nice and orderly. I actually really like doing this huge, just flat layout. Since I've done so many towers in this playthrough, it was actually pretty fun being able to build these instead of just going vertical. It's fun to spice it up every once in a while. So for the final bit of the fuel rods, they're all going to get connected to here. And then that's going to run along here. And then this is a gigantic 5-way split. So we got first the merger, the splitter that splits it in half. So 3/5 on this side, 2/5 on this side, meaning this part is the one that cycles back to the merger. I thought it would be best to do the 5-way split first, because then after that point, it's a nice easy 2, 2, 2 for the 8 that are in each of these rows. So this factory only makes 16 uranium fuel rods per minute, but because it takes 150 seconds, so 2.5 minutes to create each one, they're basically going to spit out 40 at a time, and that'll go through here and it'll all get split up, and then another whole 40. Good old load balancing. And so this actually ends up working really well. So this right here, because it only needs 16 a minute on here, it's Mark 1, and this long section of all of these Mark 1 belts is probably one of the longest parts of the startup time of this whole thing, which I don't mind, because once it gets going, you've just got this nice parade of fuel rods just all over the place, and I like the way it looks, so I personally don't mind that it takes a little bit longer. But I am curious about how much quicker this factory would be if it used all Mark 5 belts from one process to the other. So I may make a separate save file, and I don't know if I'll make another video or if it'll just be my own curiosity. So if you're curious too, let me know. But I might make a whole bunch of the belts Mark 5 just to see how much quicker this entire thing will start up. But let me show off the rest. So after it does the 5-way split, we're just splitting between all 8. And then what I did for the waste is that's these yellow ones, they're all getting combined. Each power plant is going to put out 20. So with 8 in a row, I've got 160 per minute. Now there's 2 ways you could go about doing the load balancing for the waste. Kind of simple solution would be I need 600 over here and 200 going to the particle accelerators. So since each one of these is putting out 20, I could group up 10 of them, send them to those, group up all the rest of the reactors, and send them to those blenders. That would be the simple solution, but I would much rather it be a little bit more reliable. So I took the output of each row, and I have those going into this little setup here. So it goes into a splitter. I split it in half. So if everything's running at full speed, we'll have 80 here and 80 here. I then split this one in half. So 40 here, and then 40 comes back up to here to loop up with this 80, giving me 3/4 and 1/4 down here. The reason I did it this way is in total I have 800 uranium waste per minute. So I can't group up all of the output and then load balance it. This way, each row is being load balanced into the correct amounts to go into the recycling. So it doesn't matter if only one reactor is turned on or all 40 of them are turned on. The recycling process will receive the correct amount of waste no matter what. So the waste just heads over here. The 1/4 of it goes there. 3/4 goes there. Oh yeah, and I added these little signs because it made the belting from one place to another when I needed to make sure that I had the right amounts just a lot easier. So I made just this little blueprint of just some beams and a couple of the small billboards and just the real basic information, inputs, outputs for each section. And then I went ahead and added a couple pumps just to make sure that I have no issues getting it all to where it's supposed to go. So after basically 2 junctions, so once I grouped up 4 of them, I put down a pump to make sure that that's just nothing's backing up. This pipe should never be full because there's only going to be 240. So I really shouldn't have any issue with any of these having water issues with them combining or anything, because there should be plenty of space. And as soon as the water gets to the refineries, it'll just get used. So none of this should fill up, I hope. And then with this final product, most of it was coming from different places. And then the final piece was plugging in from that side. But this is right here where we're going to make the plutonium fuel rods. And then the output will get all grouped up head over to this sink, and this will take care of all of the extras for the factory. And by extras, that is the concrete that we're making out of the wastewater, the plutonium fuel rods, and the one other piece that I totally forgot to mention until now. So this belt that's coming from way up there, actually, I just wanted it to all get grouped together for no good reason. I easily could have just added a sink underneath the train station and it would have been a much quicker belt. But I did this instead. So there's actually going to be 50 Quickwire and 35 copper ingots extra. And the reason for that is it was the simplest solution I could come up with so that I did not have to work with insane decimal points. Because if I did, then some of the underclocking to get it all to work was just going to be messy. And so to get just all even numbers for all of the inputs and for most of the machines and everything, having just a tiny bit of extra of those two things just made everything just so much easier. It was the first time that I've really had to do it, and it took me a while to realize that that was a pretty easy solution. But once I did, and then I had even numbers on everything in my spreadsheet, just had to go with it. So thankfully there really wasn't a whole lot of crazy load balancing between things. Like all of the copper sheets are going to one place. I had to balance a little bit of the copper ingots. But since each machine outputs 100, honestly, load balancing all of that is really simple. But let me show off a couple things. So with the electromagnetic control rods, I needed those to go to two places. 80 of them are going to the uranium fuel rods, and then the other 24 are going to the plutonium fuel rods. So this is how I split it off. So since I've got 27 assemblers, they're just grouped in threes, and so merging them all together was pretty simple. We've got them all coming together. So on here I have 104, and I used the smart splitter trick. So the priority is to the right, overflow is to the left. So I had to use the little split belt trick because since this only has 104, it's not a full 120. Every once in a while there's going to be a gap. If that gap happens to line up, if this was a Mark 1 belt, it can only take them so fast. But if it doesn't take it fast enough, then there's going to be a gap on here. So if the gaps line up at the same time, then I don't have 60. So to avoid that, I use half the belt as Mark 2 because that can grab them more quickly. It'll stutter because then it's limited down to Mark 1. But this is how I ensure that this belt will be completely full and I've got 60 a minute to do the rest of my load balancing with. So since I need 24 going that way, easiest way is just to take a 60 line, split it 5 ways. 2 fifths would make 24, and then we'll just loop back the rest of it with everything else. And that'll leave me with my 80. So we've got our merger into a splitter. 3 fifths is going that way. 2 fifths is going into this splitter. So we've got the 2 fifths combined with the merger there. And then that last piece is the part that loops back to make this whole thing work. Over here at the copper ingots, the load balancing was fairly simple. The only kind of interesting part I would say would be this. Since the copper sheets need 1040 and I have those 3 equal towers to do it in, that meant each one needed 346 and 2/3. Now that number by itself is pretty awful to try to load balance. 1040 really isn't too bad. So I got a total of 1040 across these 2 belts and then plug them into the 2 to 3 belt load balancer. And then that way I can have the exact amount on each of these belts and send them over to the correct towers. So the fuse Quickwire is probably where most of the load balancing went. So this needs to get broken up into 3 different amounts. In total, I'm making 6,300 Quickwire. 3,000 of it is going right here. So those are actually the farthest towers and amounts. And that's probably the easiest. I just needed to get them grouped up into amounts of 750. And then plug each one into a quarter of the manufacturers here. And with each machine outputting 90, getting 750 really isn't too bad. Because 8 machines will give you 720, meaning you're only short 30. And that's obviously 1/3 of a machine. So that's pretty simple. And so most of this is just grouping up the right amount of machines and sending them along the bus to the correct part of the factory. Before we turn this all on, I want to show you something. So right now my power grid is nice and flat, but somehow our consumption is above our max consumption. And I actually know why. So let me show you. So my original plan was to bring in the limestone from the grassy fields and use that for the wet concrete. And I again made a mistake when looking at my spreadsheet, and I picked the wrong amount. Turns out I needed more. I needed 288, not 120, which is the default amount for the recipe. So sometimes when you turn on machines and you already have them underclocked, for whatever reason the consumption and max consumption just don't quite calculate right. So if you just cut the power and then reconnect it, we should be able to come over here. And now the max consumption is lowered to be the correct amount. So now we've got nice even numbers. Alright, the part we've all been waiting for. Getting to watch it all come to life. I am going to flip this switch, which is just the main power for everything. I am going to turn off that temporary sink that's sinking everything underneath. So if you notice, I'm also quite close. I don't have a whole lot of wiggle room. I did add some more batteries, so I have 23,000 instead of the 9,000 I've had for most of the playthrough. And honestly, this would probably be fine. But because I don't need it right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my drone port. Now that will turn off the batteries going to a couple factories, but this won't take long enough for them to be able to go through the whole stockpile that they have. So that buys me a little bit extra time. And with all the batteries, this won't be a problem at all. So let's flip this switch and watch it come to life. So I need to connect this power because the last 2 rows of power plants are actually on the train power grid, and I'll explain why I did that later. First, let's go ahead and turn this off and get everything flowing into the factory. And there go the first infused uranium cells. So let me show you where these are going. I do love the way load balancing looks. So I'm going to clear up some of the excess in a bunch of these lines later so that everything is running a little bit more smooth. But with so many different parts, it was just going to be way too hard to stagger it. So it'll be easier just to kind of clean out the extra once everything is running at 100%. So for the time being, I'm just going to store some encased uranium cells because these are finishing so much faster than the other 2 parts. And if I was going to be able to play this, say, for more than the next 2 months, I'd be able to make a whole bunch of nuke nobelisks out of these. Now I'm just waiting for these manufacturers to get enough of the electromagnetic control rods before I switch the smart splitters over and start sending the encased uranium cells, because those will fill up pretty quickly at the rate they're coming in. So in the meantime, let me show you how I clear out some of these lines that obviously are stuttering, so they have too much. What I like to do is just grab a smart splitter And we'll just work with the sulfur here. Go ahead and just place it on the existing belt. If you want to save the material for any reason, use a storage unit, or if you just want to clear this out, just go ahead and set down a sink. Pick at least the same belt speed. Should be power just about everywhere. So go ahead and just grab a line. And now, the reason why I do a smart splitter is I could do overflow, and that would clear out all of the excess behind this splitter. But if I want to get the stuttering to go away for everything, what I can do is I can just switch this all over to the sink. And then I can watch as the line clears up. All the way back to the machines, because all the machines obviously are completely full. They're only using 25 per minute. So if I let these go all the way back to the machine to completely clear out the line, and then I can just delete this smart splitter and it'll send it all back. And then we'll still have a large buffer inside the machine, but I won't have to watch that stuttering belt anymore. And I totally forgot to unmute my mic during that. So basically, once it's cleaned up, then I just delete the smart splitter and the sink. And now all of the stuttering's gone, and I've got the gaps that I like to see on there. Now that the machines have a few of the electromagnetic control rods, I'm going to go ahead and switch these smart splitters. So for these, I'm just going to flip-flop it. So it's any, and then overflow, because why not? And even though these lines are at 100%, it's still going to take 2.5 minutes because they only receive 20 at a time. They only receive 20 per minute, but you need 2.5 minutes worth for each cycle. Essentially, the cycle time is so long. There we go, our first batch of fuel rods. I do really like the way they look. They did a great job. So this is the load balancing for the 8 different power plants that are on each row. So I'm going to delete this very first belt that goes into the very first splitter on each row. And the reason for that is I want to make sure that there's just a tiny buffer in each of the power plants, just in case. So the reason I did that is I want a small buffer. I'm going to let about, I don't know, probably 16 fuel rods build up on each of these belts so that when I send it, each one will get 2. So that means that it'll have the one to immediately burn, and then it'll kind of just have one as a backup, just to give it a little bit of wiggle room. It'll take an extra 5 minutes to build up an extra 8 for each row, but it'll be much smoother when they turn on, and I won't have to risk them turning off or on at all. Alright, so I think there's actually only 15, although, oh, the 16th one finally got there. So we're close enough. So let's go ahead and connect these belts. Now we get to watch the rest of the load balancing do its work, and then start seeing this whole thing spit out all of that bright, yellow, beautiful, radioactive goo.
music to my ears. And there we go. The first plutonium fuel rods that are just gonna go straight into the sink here. But that is the entire process complete. I'm very happy. Took a while from start to finish, but for all that I've accomplished, I am really happy. Now let me go through and clean up some of those lines that are a little bit backed up so they're not stuttering anymore, and maybe polish off a little bit more of the aesthetics. Gotta love seeing the smokestacks and those particle accelerators. That is mission complete. So I wanted to let it run for a little while. I wanted to make sure there was no major issues so that as soon as I left I didn't have to come right back and start fixing things. And in that time I was able to clear out all of the excess on the belts, so everything is moving nice and smooth. I also finally added the little catwalks around the buildings. I added some connections to make everything feel a little bit more complete and traversable if you weren't using Fly like I am right now. And it just makes shots like this just look so much cooler. So right when I started turning everything on, I went underneath the train station and connected 2 wall power outlets. What that did was combine these last 2 rows with my train network. The other 3 rows are all on the main grid. Now, it's not nearly as satisfying when you look at the grid because I've split my power in a 40-60 split. So now when I look at my main power grid, I've added 120 gigawatts. I was at 84,000 megawatts. Now I'm at 204,000. Got a nice clean flat power graph with both the consumption, max consumption being exactly the same, and rock steady. So I wanted to keep that the same because this is my canary in the coal mine. If any factory is starting to have issues, this won't stay flat anymore and I'll start to see this number change. The other 40%, or 80 gigawatts, is going to my train network. So I went from it only having 4,800 to 84,800. So this is my variable power graph. Everything that can either stop and start or just has a fluctuation in its power consumption, like vehicles, mainly trains, you'll actually see it gets a slight bonus power every once in a while, and it's my understanding that the brakes on trains are actually somewhat regenerative, and so when you have some trains braking, you'll get just a couple extra megawatts. It won't be a lot, but you'll just kind of get bonus power for no good reason. But the main fluctuation on this is now the particle accelerators, and that's the big reason why I wanted to add more power to that power grid so that I could put just the particle accelerators on the same power grid as everything else that fluctuates. So we've got plenty of extra space, and the thing that's going to use up the most is adding even more particle accelerators when we get to that nuclear pasta. Tasty, tasty pasta. Can't wait. But that's going to use up a huge amount of the power for that power grid. All in all, I have way more than I need, and I am okay with that. So added 200 gigawatts to my power grid. That is mission complete. The next project is obviously a space elevator part, and I'm probably just going to work my way down the list from left to right, so it's probably going to be the magnetic field generators. So look forward to that, and thanks for watching.